Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I'm a toddler whisperer, a parent coach, and a speech therapist. And today I have Vijay Ravindran with me. Vijay, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you today because this is a little bit different for us. We're going to talk about technology. And this is your bailiwick, but it certainly is not mine. But before we do that, before we jump in, tell the good people something about yourself, why you're here, what you do, all of those things.
Absolutely. I think probably first and foremost, I'm here because I'm an autism parent and have learned from the School of Hard Knocks the challenges that our community goes through as we try to see the best outcomes for our kids. Um, I am a technologist. I was an early engineer at Amazon, joining in 1998. I was there for 7 years. I ran uh, a number of engineering teams, including leading the launch of Amazon Prime, and uh, and now have taken a lot of those skills to start a company called Floreo that uses virtual reality to help kids.
So this is interesting to me, right? Because you're leveraging your skills on behalf of a need that you saw that your son had, or you thought this might be able to help. And so, what was your thought process, and sort of what did the early part of this technology look like? And then tell us what it is. Like, go into all the things.
Yeah, well, I think probably the easiest is to give you a thumbnail of the origin story and then go into what it is. So, um, you know, prior to starting Floreo, I was an executive at the Washington Post company, and it was during this period that my son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And, as many kids do, especially when they get an early diagnosis like he did too, been through thousands of hours of therapy. And when he was 6 years old, he saw me experimenting with early virtual reality technology. This was in late 2015, and he wanted to try it out. And he spent about 30 minutes in VR, and an amazing thing happened where he seemed to then start pretend playing based on the scenes he had been through in virtual reality. And it had been a skill that his therapist had tried to work on and had some successes, but it was not there was something about the virtual reality experience that seemed to unlock imagination. And so it led to me taking this idea and really starting as a basement project that could virtual reality be a new medium for therapy to help teach social skills and other foundational speech and communication skills. And and so I started as a basement project. I was able to recruit some people that knew a lot more than I did about the therapeutic side. A speech therapist that I've worked with for many years in the area, a developmental pediatrician at Children's National, and we built an initial version of this concept of VR-based therapy. It was built around something that speech therapists in the audience will know about around joint attention, and we created an immersive experience where the child could wear the VR headset and be able to demonstrate and practice joint attention in this virtual world with animated rewards and a naturalistic paradigm that really liked. And and then that became the basis of our system. A key insight early on was that when a child wears a VR headset, you don't know what they're seeing. And so one of the first things we really worked on technologically was how to stream a live view of what the child is seeing in VR to a second device, and enable that supervising adult to be able to not only see what they're seeing, but be able to converse with them and provide praise and encourage them. That then later extended into puppeteering characters that could have social interactions with the child that they could be practicing to record data so that you would know how they did going forward. And then ultimately to the system that's there today, where We do all of that, and we enable telehealth-based therapy delivery using the system.
So, and you may not know the answer to this. Why is this effective? Why what happens with VR that doesn't happen in IRL?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think in addition to in real life, there's also 2D based ways of learning, whether it's flashcards or videos or others that also are utilized in the context of therapy or special education programs. There's a really interesting history of virtual reality showing, accelerated learning outcomes in a number of different spaces. And back in 2016, when I was researching this, I spent a lot of time reading. There were studies specific to autism. There were studies in workplace training. There were studies in other areas of cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy techniques. And, you know, while I wouldn't say anyone like figured out at some molecular level, this is what's going on, what what seemed to be going on as a consistent theme was that in a virtual reality environment, the full 3D immersion conveys the situation in ways that leads to, more impactful learning and retained skill development, and that those skills are generalized back to the real world. So the repetitions that are done in VR stick. And as I was starting the company, there were probably a dozen other companies that were developing solutions in other spaces, from teaching football quarterbacks how to read defenses and know where to throw the ball to training Walmart employees.
I love it. So it's so what's so interesting, kind of generally speaking, this is interesting to me. It's not necessarily related, but this, right, the different applications, a technology emerges and everybody kind of takes that ball and is like, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go over there. And that's super interesting. But is there also I am imagining, and you tell me, there's like a filtering effect from real life into VR, right? In other words, it's not, you tell me how to explain this, but it's not as rich, it's not as complex, it's not as noisy. I don't know. What's the thing?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I think we call it the auditory and visual distractions of the real world. And so, I mean, think of a child in a therapist office and the air conditioning kicks in, or the light bulbs are flickering in some weird way, or there's something on the therapist's desk that catches their attention. With our kids in this population, all of those have the potential to derail the primary objective of that therapy session, because they get the attention of the child is fixated on it. And similarly, when you think of, especially when you think of therapy at the home, the number of distractions at home are countless, and all home environments are not the same. None of them are antiseptic in how they're set up, and so there's incredible distractions in the real world. In VR, you have control. You have control of how realistic the animation is, how noisy or unnoisy the scene is built around. And we have leveraged that to create for lessons for younger learners or earlier on the developmental ladder, to create simplified worlds that allow them to focus on the skill that's being taught and not get sidelined by other stuff happening.
Mhm.
And then as you move up to, lessons that we have now on going through a TSA line or a law enforcement encounter or team customer service scenario in a movie theater, well, then you do have lots of distractions, because that's part of the training needed to be able to successfully generalize that skill, is not just do it when the environment is quiet, but do it when there's also distraction. But the benefit in the immersive VR world, which is somewhat unique, is that you can stair step the child to that. So you can start with a fully quiet environment, get the fundamentals down. And so, to use a sports analogy, you can take batting practice where all you get is fastballs and get your swing down.
Right.
Then, eventually you're going to have to see curveballs, and you're going to have to see curveballs from a real pitcher that's using strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's interesting. There, because the principles are the same. In other words, I trained as a speech therapist, right? Scaffolding is a thing. You
Hmm.
start either most to least or least to most prompting, whatever your level you want to do. And there are some principles involved. And um, people who are in the special education field will be thinking ABA at this point. We're not touching that today. But there are principles of teaching and learning that we can use. And it does involve removing or adding stimuli. But the thing about what you're describing is this is number one, immersive, number two, 3D, and therefore maybe more accessible. And you can filter out what you don't want when you don't want it
That's right.
in a way that's more effective, or more
Well,
than,
it's there. There's more degrees of tailoring to fit the appropriate situation. And
yeah.
so in our case with Floreo, we from the beginning designed this to be operated by an adult, and that adult who, in the primary use case today out there is a trained professional, either in special education or speech therapist or some other form of therapy, that they're able to use professional judgment on what the appropriate level of distraction should be, what that path of scaffolding to build that skill should be,
Mm-hmm.
and that the lessons give them some of those knobs and dials that allow them to be able to use it so that it can be effective. And our ultimately the metric or goal is that we want kids to reach skills faster so they can start working on the next skills so they
Mm-hmm.
can eventually get to that ultimate goal that every parent wants, which is, I want my child to be living independently, gainfully employed, have meaningful relationships, right? So it's a race to get there. And if you can make therapy, more effective, you're going to get there faster or get to heights that you didn't think possible otherwise.
Yeah. I'm wondering how, so you mentioned this is being used by professionals with their caseloads. Like, how does it work? And I would love if you've got a fun client story. I'm always down for that. Like, give us the scope of use.
Yeah. So it's a growing catalog of lessons, over 200 now, that range from starting in joint attention to a lot of life situation simulation, but with varying degrees of realism used based on the developmental steps. So friendly greetings with another tween child is more cartoony. A law enforcement encounter for teenagers and young adults, it's very realistic. The Probably the first wow story for us getting started was we had a customer in Pennsylvania, and this also I think highlights the other thing that I think is neat, which is that if you can give a tool to a talented speech therapist, they will use that tool in ways you don't envision
Yeah.
and get progress out of it because they're really smart, they're creative, they're going to come up with new ways to innovate. And so we had created a lesson on how to cross the street safely. And, the target population is kids with autism who need to learn those steps, develop those instincts about how to do that safely. And this customer instead saw the opportunity that they had a child with PTSD and schizophrenia who had been hit by a car when the child was very young. And the family was struggling because the child would not travel in the car with the family anywhere. And so imagine how debilitating that is for a family to not be able to go anywhere with the child because the child just has such a fear of being around cars and being in a car. And they ended up using the street crossing lessons as a form of exposure therapy to get the child comfortable with cars kind of going by you, that there's some structure and rules to pressing the walk sign. They do come to a stop. You can safely cross. And eventually, helped that child generalize to being able to travel with their family. Which, you think of like, what's the value that you just created? I mean, for that family, you opened up a whole world.
Wow. That's really interesting. I want to go to two things. Let's stay with the car thing for just a second, because this is a real area of concern, particularly in ADHD. If you've got some ADHD and some impulsivity along with your autism, street safety is a big deal. And so walk me through a couple of stages of the lesson, and how does it train? Because essentially what you're training is inhibition and acclimatization to a situation. But so can you just give me a couple of snippets for how that happens?
Absolutely. So this is an area that we've invested and have a number of lessons now to kind of talk about that scaffolding. The base lesson is you're at the street corner. There's a don't walk sign across from you. There's a button. There's cars whizzing by both directions. You need to cross the street. And so the first step is just helping that child identify where is the don't walk sign? What does that red hand mean? Right? How do I effectuate that red hand changing? So think of the executive function that you have to gain. I'm going to press the walk button. I'm going to hear auditorially the sound it makes, which is an important cue, right? That kids can lean on. And at some point, that red hand is going to change to the white walking man, right? There's then a really important step that has to happen that you need to teach, which is that you need to look left, right, and then left. Now, the really cool thing about virtual reality is that I can approximate where you're looking, which means that I can actually automatically validate that you shifted left, you shifted right, you shifted back left. All the cars had come to a stop. It is now safe for you to cross the street. And that you can then practice those all important steps to cross the street. And then we have rewards in the base lesson, because for younger kids, when you turn to cross the street one more time to show that you got the skill down, the safari animals from the joint attention lessons show up to congratulate you at the street corner, right? So we can be silly in virtual reality. It's a fully animated environment, and so we can make it fun for the kids.
Yeah.
Now, what's really neat is that in lesson 2, some of the cars don't immediately stop on the red light, they run it. So you have to visually verify they've come to a stop. In lesson 3, there's the jaywalker. And you have to learn the concept that just because the jaywalker does it, doesn't mean you should. And then we have subsequent lessons at 4-way stop signs. We ultimately have lessons where they're combined with catching a bus and the bus route coming, right? So for teenagers. So there's a whole world that opens up. We're just about to launch lessons that are being researched by Easter seals, Southern California, that actually you're inside the car. You're in a car seat. It's for potentially profound autism, children being transported, but also for any kid to get accustomed to the starts and stops of a car, construction, stop and go traffic, just acclimatization of that. But for the street crossing, it's layering, it's some of the differences that show up. It's being able to get, every time they're going through it, they're going to have to practice left, right, left, because that's a foundational skill in living in the real world.
I have taught crossing the street so many times, and part of the maddening part of it is the inability to control what the drivers are going to do. And so this is classic, right, use scenario where it's actually we can batch the cars all stop so that I can cross, and I'm learning one step at a time. You can do that in the virtual world in a way that you really can't in the real world. And then you can get mass practice also.
That's right.
So you can cross the same street 100 times and really know how to do that. And then you can cross a different street in a different set of connections. What am I trying to say? Situation 100 more times. And then you can mix those two up and do that 100 more times.
That's right. That's right. And the VR environment allows for that practice to be done in the office, at a level of realism that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, without any of the negative consequences of getting it wrong in the real world, right? It'd be catastrophic if you got hit by a car. And so those end up being really powerful to be able to enable.
I think that where it strikes me the most, and because the next thing I want to talk about is the police encounter, are these kind of life and death situations that are related to health and safety and matter a lot that success be achieved. And yet in the real world, you have a high level of unpredictability.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a teeny bit about like who's the law enforcement module for and that kind of thing, where you've used it?
Yeah, that's one of the earliest lessons we built. It was part of the NIH grant with Children's Hospital Philadelphia. So we've done quite a bit of research on it and really trying to reinforce that this can be used as an effective form of teaching a skill. So, after we had built those first couple of joint attention lessons, we started demonstrating at various exhibition type environments. And a family came up to me that said, "This is great, but I'm so scared of my child. Yeah, I spend so much time helping them gain independence, but I have no confidence that if they're walking the streets in the neighborhood in DC, that they will know how to handle a law enforcement encounter." And within like a week of that conversation with the family, uh, a therapist who was trying to help an adult at a group home come back to his group home was shot by the police outside of Miami, where someone called the police. The police thought a toy truck or toy train looked like a weapon. And thankfully, this therapist did survive, but it was traumatizing for both that person and the autistic adult that was involved in the incident. And and so there was this real interest, and we ended up initially working with um, Officer Lori Reyes at Montgomery County Police Department outside of DC, who heads their autism outreach unit, um, in a first version design of what VR training could be for autistic individuals. That led to a partnership with Children's Hospital Philadelphia, which led to an NIH grant, which led to money to build a more wholesome set of interventions. We were able to work with the Philadelphia Police Department ahead of a randomized controlled trial where children either receive the Floreo treatment or receive, there's a video called Be Safe that many schools and clinics use. And we were able to see in a randomized control setting which one seemed to convey the skills. And we had the participation of the Philadelphia Police Department to interview the subjects in the study. And the virtual reality training, showed really great, strong results that were ahead of the video-based training. And so, um, it's those hard to simulate moments. We just launched lessons around swimming pool safety recently, which is, number one cause of death is water in this population, right? And so really important area to teach something.
Yeah. Strikes me as you're talking, hopefully the police are also using this kind of technology.
Yeah, it's this topic is, that old saying where you're doing something right if everyone criticizes you. As people saw the lessons demonstrated by Children's Hospital Philadelphia, there was criticism from both sides. Some people in law enforcement thought there's no need for this tension to be displayed, that police are helpers and that they shouldn't be cast this way. And meanwhile, some who represented the autism community felt by even constructing these lessons, you're blaming the autistic individual for the failings of the police, and that there should be no reason to teach these skills. Um, and so that comes with the territory. Ultimately, this is a system where the caregivers and the adults who are most directly responsible for the welfare of the child make decisions on which lessons are appropriate. And we don't judge one way or another. Our lessons on joint attention have been criticized because there's people in the self-advocate community who believe that that is not something that should be trained on. But meanwhile, there are individuals that would like to improve that who are planning to do a job interview and they know that it might be a determining factor in whether you get a job or not, right? So there's the lessons are there to be used or not used if it violates some principle of yours.
It's so interesting, right? And I think you're right. Anytime there are strong feelings one way or the other, yeah, you've got something. So, and I want to say to the listener, if you've been listening and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing, or if you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds horrifying, okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
We're here. And part of the reason I wanted to have you on is because I don't see a ton of this in the conversation. And so I appreciate you coming to share your expertise, to share kind of learnings and your research, certainly. If people want to learn more about Floreo, what do they do?
Yeah, you can learn everything you need at floreovr.com. So
Mhm.
FLOREOVR.com. Our research that's published is posted there. We're really proud of it. We're an FDA breakthrough device. We're in pivotal trial to achieve FDA approval to improve social skills. And so it's a really important piece. There's a lot of lessons, and the product has, offerings for schools, clinics, and parents to be used. In a handful of states, there's Medicaid waivers also available to pay for.
Okay, so we will link to that in the show notes. And Vijay, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.